Thanks very much. So thank you to everyone for joining us for a September SciBar. And I think one of the main advantages of us going online over the last couple of months is that we're able to beam in some of our favourite scientists from a bit further afield. And I think it's fair to say that Helen is one of my faves. I first met her back in 2011 at a conference in New Zealand when we were both struggling through our PhDs. I think I was a recent survivor and Helen had the end was in sight. Since then, she's been radio tracking kiwi, she's been playing with bird sperm, and she's now a beaver botherer. So Helen moved back to the UK a couple of years ago and now works with the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, that's the RZSS, as their conservation programme manager. And RZSS is one half of the Scottish Beavers partnership, so they're working in close collaboration with the Scottish Wildlife Trust. Struggling with my words today. So yeah, I'm going to hand you over to Helen now, who's going to talk to us about beaver reintroductions in the UK. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire. So I'll just pop up the presentation. There we go. Everybody see that? Wonderful. Okay, so hi, yes, as Claire said, my name is Helen and I am the Conservation Programme Manager at RZSS, and I'll explain a little bit about who we are and what we do. But the main thing I'm going to talk to you today about is beavers, which is these wonderful animals that you can see on the screen here. And it's actually a really good time to come and talk to you guys about beavers because although I work with beavers in Scotland, there's actually been loads of chat about beavers in England recently, partly because the River Otter beaver trial in Devon has sort of come to an end and the government has said, yes, those beavers are allowed to stay in that river. And that's the first sort of official sanctioning of beavers in England. There's also been a lot of campaigning around some of the other beavers that have been released into England in sort of various unauthorised manners and whether they should be able to stay. And there's a proposal to bring beavers back to Cheshire, which is being run by the Cheshire Wildlife Trust. And that's to bring two beavers into what I believe is going to be sort of a fenced enclosure. And I know they're still fundraising for the end of that project, so I'm sure they'd appreciate everybody going and having a look at the work they're trying to do if you see this talk and think that beavers are the best thing ever, which if you don't see that by the end of this talk, then I've failed completely. So just don't tell me that, I don't want to know. So yeah, really, really good time to talk to people outside of Scotland about beavers because this is going to become increasingly relevant for you guys. But first, just a little bit about who we are and who I work for, because a lot of the time when I talk about the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland, people just look at me and be like, well, what's that? And then I say, oh, we're based at Edinburgh Zoo. And they're like, oh, Edinburgh Zoo. So RZSS is a wildlife conservation charity that leads two zoos. One is Edinburgh Zoo in Edinburgh and one is the Highland Wildlife Park up in the Cairngorms. And yes, we do have our zoos and they're really important. And there's actually a show just started on BBC iPlayer about our zoos. Chester have one, so now we have to have one too. And it's called Inside the Zoo and it broadcasts every Monday at 8 PM. So tune into that if you want to know more about our zoos and our work. But we actually have 23 different conservation projects around the world that are run by the team that I work for, the conservation department. We were also very fortunate to have our own on-site conservation genetics lab, which is the Wild Genes Lab, and we're the only zoo in the UK that has an on-site conservation genetics lab. So that allows us to help out conservation projects in lots of exciting and different ways. We are part of the Beavers project, which is what I'll be talking about today. And we're also part of the Partulus Snail project, which is also a Chester Zoo project too, where lots of zoos work on Partulus snails. And we support a lot of international projects as well, particularly in Brazil and Uganda. And our most recent sort of high profile project is our Scottish Wildcat Breeding for Reintroduction Centre that's going to be built as an offshore enclosure up at Highland Wildlife Park in order to reintroduce that species back into the Cairngorms. So we're involved in lots of kind of wild conservation projects, stuff that's taking place in the wild outside of our zoos. But the one thing I'm going to talk to you about today is the Scottish Beavers project. So as Claire said, this is a partnership project. So the partners are ourselves and the Scottish Wildlife Trust. We're supported in this project by Nature Scot, who were formerly Scottish Natural Heritage, and also Forestry and Land Scotland. We get assistance from the Heart of Argyll Wildlife Organisation, and we get a lot of funding from the People's Postcode Lottery. And just so you can see on the little map there where the Scottish Beavers project is based, for those of you not familiar with Scotland, that is Argyll, and it's just this one little forest site in Argyll. So first, a little bit about what is a beaver. Because a lot of people, I appreciate, I used to do this talk and not explain what beavers were, and then people would ask lots of different questions about beavers and what they are and what they do, and I was like, oh yeah, a lot of people have never seen a beaver, and I actually didn't know a huge amount about beavers before I started working on this project. So I think it's really important to sort of explain that kind of stuff to people. So first, what are not beavers? So capybaras are not beavers. Capybaras are the world's largest rodent. Beavers are the world's second largest rodent. Capybaras live in South America, so it's unlikely that you're going to mistake a capybara for a beaver in this country. Muskrats are not beavers, but in America, they get mistaken for them all the time. They're smaller than beavers, they've got a long pointed tail, but if you Google image search beavers, you'll often see pictures of muskrats popping up, which is really confusing. And koipu are also not beavers. That's another South American species that often gets mistaken for beavers in a Google image search. And in this country, a lot of the people who tell us they've seen beavers, what they've actually seen, and also lucky them, is otters. Otters are not beavers. There are some very important differences between these two animals, which I'll come on to in a minute. But we do get a lot of people ringing us up, especially in the KNAPDALE area where our project is based, saying, I've seen a beaver, and we say, oh, where was it and what was it doing? And the more they tell us, the more we're like, no, that was an otter, but well done you, that's a great sighting as well. So beavers are none of these things. But beavers are rodents. Like I said, they're the world's second largest rodent, and they have some really interesting distinctive features. So the first I'll talk about is the fact they've got this big flat paddle tail, which they use because they are an aquatic rodent. So the paddle tail is really good for swimming. They also use it for signaling danger by slapping it on the surface, and I'll show you a video of that a little bit later on in the talk. They have webbed feet, which again is because they are aquatic, and it's really weird when you see them on land because their back feet are massive and splayed and webbed, and they look really, really freaky. But when they're in the water, they're really useful because that helps them swim around and dive and do all the things they need to do. And possibly one of their most distinctive features is their teeth. So they've got these massive incisors for their front teeth, and they are orange in color. And the reason they're orange is because they are reinforced with iron. That makes them really, really strong. And that's really important because one of the things beavers are famous for is being able to cut down huge trees, and they wouldn't be able to do that without these really strong teeth. There are actually two species of beavers. There are European beavers and American beavers. And one of these pictures is a European beaver, and one is an American beaver, and I would defy anyone to be able to tell me without just guessing which one is which, because it's actually really, really hard to tell just by looking at them. But just so you know, this one is the American beaver, which is found in America, Canada, and parts of Mexico, and the top guy is the European beaver, which is found right across Europe in a bunch of different countries, and now here in the UK as well. And the only real difference is that the North American beaver is very slightly heavier in some cases, and that's kind of it. But interestingly, and I only found this out the other day, North American beavers and European beavers have different numbers of chromosomes. So that means that they can't mate together. If they try to mate, their offspring either don't survive or they're stillborn or whatever, because you've got that chromosome mismatch. So they're actually, although they're extremely closely related, they're completely reproductively isolated, which is really unusual and really, really interesting. So that's a fun beaver fact. How big are these beavers when we think about, you know, sorry, Claire, did you just spit your tea? So when we're thinking about how big a beaver is, just to give you an idea, here's a beaver next to a person. We've chosen Justin Bieber for no reason at all. And so what you can see is that beavers are, when they're on all fours, they're about just over a foot in height. So they're not a huge animal, but they are big, they're chunky, they're heavy, and they can do some damage because of those massive teeth that they've got. People have died from being bitten by beavers because if they happen to nick an artery or something like that, and you bleed out before you can get help, you're in a lot of trouble. So you don't really want to mess with an angry beaver. And I think that's advice we can all live by. So the other key thing about beavers is that they are herbivores. So we get a lot of people saying, oh, I've just seen a beaver and it's eating a fish. I'm like, no, that's definitely an otter. Beavers do not eat fish. And that's a really key fact about these animals because they get a lot of bad rep for eating people's fish in their fisheries and things like that. Beavers do not do that. They are exclusively plant eaters. So that's what all the chopping down trees is all about, and they'll eat other kinds of vegetation as well. They love diving down for like lily roots in ponds and stuff like that, but they are all about the veg. So that is their thing. So why would we bring beavers back to the UK? So beavers have been missing from the UK for about 400 years. Their last sort of stronghold was Scotland, and they disappeared from Scotland just over 400 years ago now. And the reason they disappeared was because of hunting, because beavers have some of the softest, thickest, warmest fur in the animal kingdom. And that's unfortunate for beavers because it means it makes really good hats and coats. And the other thing that beavers have is a gland in their butts that makes a substance called castoreum. And castoreum is I can attest that it's a very fragrant, potent sort of substance. You don't want to get your clothes covered in it because it's never coming off. And that was used a lot. It holds scent really well. So it got used a lot in perfume, old-timey perfumes, and also to flavor ice cream. So a lot of sort of vanilla ice cream, raspberry ice cream was flavored with beaver butt juice, which, you know, each their own, I suppose. But yeah, so that was why beavers were hunted to extinction, for those two things, fur and castoreum. But beavers are really important. They're really important ecosystem engineers, and they're a keystone species for UK biodiversity. And when we talk about ecosystem engineers, what we're talking about is animals that sort of modify the landscape they're living in a really positive way, usually, and create lots of benefits for other species living in that same habitat. So why are beavers an ecosystem engineer? Well, famously, they are really, really good at modifying the habitat they live in. There is no animal other than humans that we're aware of that is as good at modifying their habitat as beavers are. So this picture here is in KNAPDALE, it's in our site. And what this is showing is a pond that's been made by a beaver. So along the front of the picture, there's a dam, that wall of mud and sticks, that's a dam that the beavers have made. And that dam has trapped water behind it. And this is part of a water system called the Duloch, which is, it was a puddle and is now a massive loch. And there was this lovely walkway that had been put in for tourists and stuff like that. And the beavers were like, nah, we don't want that. So they flooded it out, and now the walkway goes a different direction. But you can come, it's really good because there's a lovely walkway up to the loch, and you can see what the beavers have done. Now, the reason beavers do this is because beavers are a lot safer and they move a lot easier when they are in the water. So they're a bit lumbering on land, they're not super graceful, but once they're in the water, they move fantastically and they feel very safe. So beavers are all about, they're control freaks. They're all about control. They want as much water around them as possible. They want to control the water level so that rather than having to swim to the end of a lake and climb out and get on land to get to the trees they want to eat, they want to be able to swim up to those trees and just pull them straight down into the water. So by controlling the water level, they put the water where they want it to be and give themselves more water to swim around in, more water to feel safe in, and that allows them to move around their habitat in a much more effective way for them. They build ponds, they build canals, all kinds of different water channels to help them navigate the landscape. And when they do that, what they do is create habitat for things like fish, amphibians, insects. You know, the increase in those kind of species in places where beavers are present versus before the beavers were reintroduced has been really well documented. And so they're creating habitat for a lot of really important UK biodiversity. So putting beavers into an area can have really big benefits for other species that might want to live there. In terms of our site in KNAPDALE, so KNAPDALE's a wee forest site in Argyll in Western Scotland. And beavers were first released there in 2009, 2010 as part of what was then called the Scottish Beaver Trial. And trial is a really important word in that title because it really was a trial. They wanted to see what would happen if we brought beavers back into the UK, what would be the impacts, how would the beavers do, how would the people living with the beavers do, and that trial period was really important. So it was licensed as a trial. It was like, okay, you've got this 5-year period, let's see how this goes. So there were 11 beavers released in 2009, a further 5 in 2010, and all of those beavers came from Norway. So they were wild beavers from Norway that came over to KNAPDALE and were released there. And why was KNAPDALE chosen? Well, several reasons. Number one, it's really good beaver habitat. So it's a series of different lochs and waterways surrounded by some really nice trees of the kind that beavers like aspen, hazel, willow, all the kinds of their sort of favorite trees. So lots of really good sites to release beavers, but also really importantly, Knapdale is a relatively enclosed site. So it's actually quite difficult for beavers to move in and out of Knapdale. It's bordered at the northern end by a really long canal that it's hard for them to get over, and the southern side is ocean. And beavers can navigate around like small headlands and stuff like that. They certainly do that in Norway, but it's really hard for them to disperse widely from this habitat. And it's also has really low human habitation. So there's not many people actually living in Knapdale. There's not many people trying to farm the land in Knapdale. And that was really important in terms of providing a site that was going to produce as little human-wildlife conflict as possible and just allow us to see what would happen for beavers and a landscape that was suitable for beavers. Okay, so that's really important. And before beavers were released into Knapdale, there was several years of consultation with local stakeholders, with the public, with the government, a huge amount of form filling that had to be done around licensing, animal welfare, animal health checks to prevent disease transmission. It was a whole process, and it was really important that that process was gone through. Now, at the same time, in Tayside, which is on the eastern side of Scotland, just north of Edinburgh, there was an unlicensed beaver release in 2006, around 2006. That was when beavers were first detected in Tayside. And that population grew very, very quickly. So bearing in mind, you know, we released 16 beavers into Knapdale. We currently have 20 to 30 beavers. It's a closed site. There's only so many beavers we can have. By 2012, there were 150 beavers in Tayside, and by a survey in 2014, there were 430 beavers in Tayside. And the reason for this is that the Tay catchment, the River Tay, is like, it has loads and loads of branches and tributaries, and it's just like a beaver superhighway. It's full of really suitable habitat for beavers, so it's really easy for them to spread and move through that. But the unfortunate thing about Tayside is that the majority of the land there is classed as prime agricultural land. It's got a higher density of prime agricultural land, I think, than anywhere else in Scotland. And so in terms of human-wildlife conflict, it is the last place you would put beavers if you were doing a planned release, because the potential for beavers to cause issues to land that's being used for agriculture is really, really high. And that's exactly what's happened. So this guy here is standing in one of his extremely valuable fields that he's using to grow crops for people like us to eat. And it's been flooded out because the beavers moved in nearby and done what beavers do best and have been like, I want to put water here and I want to put it all over your field. And unfortunately, that doesn't work very well for the farmers. So this has caused a lot of problems, and a lot of the controversy that you'll see in the news comes from this issue here with human-wildlife conflict in Tayside. And it's really important to remember that when a species has been missing from a landscape for 400 years, the land use that's happening there is going to change. Like 400 years ago, that land was being used really differently potentially. And so this is one of the things we have to think about with reintroductions. Where are we going to put species when we bring them back, and where is it suitable for them, and how can we best coexist with them? But the key thing for us is that all the beavers that went into Tayside were from different genetic stock. So all the Knapdale beavers came from Norway, but all the Tayside beavers are Bavarian beavers. They're from Germany, and they are really genetically different to the Knapdale beavers. So that presented us with a really interesting opportunity. And so in 2017, we started the Scottish Beavers Reinforcement Project, which is the project I work on now. It's on my lovely t-shirts. And what the aim of that project was to do was to boost the population size in Knapdale, because after the trial, there were maybe like 10 or 12 beavers remaining. And so it was like, okay, we reckon we could have more beavers in that population. But also, all of those beavers came from Norway, and genetic analysis that was done after the trial found that actually Norwegian beavers themselves have really, really low genetic diversity. So they're not great founding stock for a population. So one of the aims was to bring in beavers from Tayside and do some genetic mixing to boost genetic diversity. So we're trying to boost the population size and boost the genetic diversity in Knapdale, and hopefully be able to resolve some of the conflicts that are happening in Tayside by going to farmers who've got problems with beavers on their land and say, well, we'll take them away. We'll catch those beavers, we'll take them away to Knapdale, and we'll translocate them over there. So it's kind of like a three-pronged system. Now, it's time for some audience participation because we're going to talk about why we would bother boosting genetic diversity. So for those of you who have got your sweets ready, I'm just going to come out of here and we can all say hello. So who has, people who've got sweets, who read the instructions, can you put your cameras on and show me your sweets and join in? Come on, Mike, I know you've got sweets.
I've put them all over the desk, but yeah.
Build them on your desk.
Here's my, yeah.
It's not. Becky, you put your pencils. Those are cancels.
Do I need them in a...
Claire, where's your dried fruit?
My blue ones are
Put it down there. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to simulate. If you haven't got any sweets, it's fine, because you can just watch mine, and then you can watch me eat them all and wish that you'd bought sweets. But so what we're going to do is we're going to show what happens when a population goes through a genetic bottleneck and why that's not great. So we're going to imagine that my glass of Skittles is a population of animals, and they could be beavers, they could be birds, whatever your favorite animal is, it could be this population. And then something is going to happen to that population. So it could be that, so if you had a population in New Zealand, for example, it could be that you get a rat incursion, or in somewhere like Mauritius, or there's an oil spill. Oh my God, when did that happen? Yeah, so something bad is going to happen, or a translocation is going to happen. So what that means is that only a few of the animals in this population are going to make it through to the other side of that event. So for everybody who's got a coloured item of things, what I want you to do is close your eyes, and it's a bit of a trust exercise, isn't it? Close your eyes. I'm not going to make fun of you. And I want you to randomly choose 2 items out of your jar of coloured items. So I'm doing it to, I've got my two things. Okay, has everybody done that? Right. So what I should have said is the colours in the jar represent genetic diversity. Now, oh, you've got pencils as well. Well done. Is it pencils? Yeah, okay. Oh, brilliant. We've got more. Oh, is that mini eggs? Fantastic. Can you even get those at this time of year?
Step up, that is.
Amazing. Oh, smart. Oh, no, you went Smarties. Okay, cool, cool. Retro choice. I like it. So the different colours represent different genetic diversity. So genetic diversity is the reason why we all look different to one another. So I have blue eyes, some of you will have brown eyes, some of you will have green eyes. And the reason for that is that we have different variants of the genes that code for eye color, okay? And genetic diversity is really important because it also codes for things like disease resistance and, you know, being able to adapt to survive to a changing climate. So in general, more genetic diversity is better. So more colors is better. Now, lots of colours in the jar, well, you know, 5, because that's how many's in Skittles. And so there's colours there, but what I've picked out here, so I've got a purple Skittle and a green Skittle. So I now only have 2 colours. Does everyone else have, oh my God, you've got 2 yellow M&Ms. This is a disaster. That's the worst case scenario. What you've got there, you've got a purple and yeah, what's that? You've got a pink and a purple? Smartie? Yeah, okay, cool. But has everybody got fewer colours in their hand than they had in their pot? Yeah, because in order to capture, so for my Skittles, for example, in order to have a good chance at capturing all the different colours, I'd have to be able to pick at least 5 Skittles, but just due to random chance, I'd probably have to pick more than that to get all the colours, right? Because it just doesn't work if you just pick 2. So these guys are gone. They're dead, whatever, oil slick, nightmare, disaster, tragedy, it's all over the news. These guys have survived, okay? Unfortunately for us, your 2 items that you've got happen to be a male and a female of whatever you're packing. And that means that they can breed. But because they're only the colours that you've got, those are going to be the only colours in your new population. So my new population will all be purple and green Skittles. And Mike's population is just entirely yellow. It's a monoculture, everyone's a clone. This is not good news. So what that means now is, let's imagine that the orange Skittle had a special genetic variant that coded against a particular disease, okay? What now happens if that disease hits my new population is that nobody's resistant to it and most of the individuals are gonna die, right? So this is a bad thing. At the same time, this mum and dad here who make all my, so now my new, let's get some baby M&Ms on the go. These guys also all, it's really hard to show on here. They're all green and purple too. They're all brothers and sisters, but they don't really have any choice of who to mate with. So they're just going to mate with each other and make more little inbred green and purple M&Ms. So we now have an issue with inbreeding as well. And inbreeding is bad news for a bunch of reasons I will explain in a minute. So what you can see is happening here, just through this experiment, is like, you know, if you were to close your eyes and let's say I pull out a fistful, Skittles everywhere now. If I pull out a fistful of Skittles, then yeah, I've got more colours. But if there's a rare Skittle, like Mike said, he only had one blue M&M in one of his packets. Even if he took a fistful of M&Ms, that is a rare, that M&M needs protecting. Even if he took a fistful of M&Ms out, it's really unlikely that he's going to capture that one blue one. It's going to be lost, okay? So when you've got really rare gene variants in your population, it's really likely that if something bad happens, or if you're subsampling from your population to do a translocation, those gene variants are going to be lost. And they might code for something really, really important. And so that could impact the future survivability and health of your population, okay? And so when we're doing a translocation, we're essentially doing exactly what we just did with our colored items. We've got our eyes closed, so we can't see the genetic variants that are inside the animals that we're choosing. So we just have to guess. We have to hope that by choosing enough animals, we're scooping up as much of the genetic variation as possible from that source population and taking it to our new site where we want to found our new population, okay? So I'm just going to show you what that looks like with the beavers. So if we do a translocation with beavers, so we imagine we've got our original population. This is maybe our Norwegian population, for example. Lots of different colors there, lots of different genetic diversity. And then we do a translocation, and that creates what we call this population bottleneck, where only a few individuals get through. And as we've seen, due to probability and chance, not all of those different colors, not all of that diversity will make it through. And that means that your new population has less genetic variation than your pre-bottleneck population. So your translocated population has less genetic variation, which means it's less adaptable and it's more vulnerable to change. At the same time, it's also quite small. So as I said, you're going to have more chance of inbreeding, more chance of mating between relatives. And that will also reduce genetic variation. It makes everybody look very, very similar. And it also increases the chance of inbreeding depression. Inbreeding depression is a reduction in the fitness of related individuals versus unrelated a reduction in the fitness of the offspring of related individuals versus the offspring of unrelated individuals. And inbreeding depression basically is when bad gene variants get expressed when they wouldn't normally. And it can affect all different kinds of stages of life, from reproduction to survival to recruitment back into the adult population. Loads of different things can be affected. And that's what the majority of my scientific research has been all about. And overall, it's going to keep your population small, it's going to reduce recruitment into your population, and it's going to increase extinction risk. So I think we can all see that this is something we want to avoid. So when we're doing a translocation, what we want to do is maximize the amount of genetic diversity that we're bringing into the population. And if we think that we failed to do that in the first instance, because maybe we sourced from a population that didn't have a lot of genetic diversity, aka Norwegian beavers, and we only brought across 16 animals, then later we might say, okay, how can we get more genetic diversity in here? Well, let's take a look at these guys in TAYSIDE. They've got genetic diversity that's different. Let's bring them in and see if they can solve the problem. So that is what the Scottish Beavers project is all about. And that, Mike, is where I thought it might be a good time to take a break, but it's up to you.
Yeah, okay, well, that's not a bad idea. Let's just take a quick 5-minute break, everyone. We're back. We'll start again at 3 minutes past. It gives everyone a quick chance to pick their Skittles off the floor. Helen?
They're everywhere. I was just surrounded by Skittles. I got too excited.
Yeah, get a fresh drink. And we'll just very briefly, I can pause the recording.
Okay, so we've talked about why we're doing the KNAPDALE Beavers Reinforcement Project, why it's important to boost those numbers and bring that genetic diversity in. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about RZSS's involvement in that project and how we work in the Scottish Beavers sort of scheme of things. So RZSS is really uniquely placed to help out with a project like this because we are a zoo-based organisation. That means we have a team of awesome vets who can do all kinds of animal health screening. You can see our head vet, Dr. Simon Gerling, here in this middle picture, with Rasheen Campbell-Palmer, who's a beaver expert who we work with as a consultant, just getting into the back end and business end of the beaver. Just FYI, the reason why you would do this, because it's I always think this is a really weird picture, but it's one of my faves, so I use it all the time. So what's happening here is, keep it together, Mike, come on, you're a scientist, be a professional. These are science, there's science talks, there's science words. So what's happening here is it's really hard to sex beavers. So they don't have any external genitalia. Everything is tucked away inside. So you can't just like lift up the tail and be like, oh, that's a boy, that's a girl, whatever. And so what you're doing when you sort of squeeze a beaver butt is you're trying to squeeze out the anal gland and the castoreum gland, and you're going to look at the secretions that you can squeeze out of there, because they are different in smell and consistency between males and females. So even when you're squeezing it, you're not getting genitals. That's not a little penis coming out there. That's the anal gland. And so what you get, and I always forget which way around it is, but one's like creamy and white like toothpaste, and one's like oily and runny. I think the creamy white one is the female, but I can't remember. And so that's how you sex a beaver, basically. So any beaver that gets caught in Tayside and brought into the zoo, obviously we don't know its history, so we have to figure out the sex ourselves, and that is what is happening in that picture. So all the beavers caught in Tayside get brought into the zoo, they get sexed, they get a health check, they get a microchip fitted so that we can identify them further down the line. Depending on what time of day they get brought in, they might get held overnight in quarantine before we take them out to KNAPDALE the next day and release them. So that's one part of it. Our vets are really important in terms of health screening beavers. And of course, whenever you do a reintroduction, if you're going to put an animal into a new environment, you want to make sure it's healthy, A, because it's more likely to survive, and B, because you don't want to be introducing any novel diseases or parasites into that environment. And so that's a really important part of a well-managed reintroduction. The other things that we do is the field work. So we have people like myself who are field conservation specialists who manage the release program, but also manage the monitoring. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that works in a minute. But basically, you know, we monitor all of the beavers that have been released into KNAPDALE, and we go out there once every 6 months to see how they're doing and make sure everything's okay, and look at how their use of the environment that they're in is changing. And then, of course, like I said before, we've got this on-site conservation genetics lab, which is fantastic, especially when we're trying to do this kind of genetic rescue, genetic boost thing by bringing these different genetic beavers in from Tayside. We've got a team on site who can run the genetic analysis for us to test whether or not that's worked. And they're actually working on that data for us right now. So it's a really, really exciting time to see how genetic diversity has changed over the course of this project. So this is great. We've got keepers who can help us with the animal handling when we're doing releases. We've got field specialists, we've got geneticists, we've got vets. We can help with a project like this in numerous different ways. And so that's a really nice way to be able to interact with a reintroduction project. So in terms of finding beavers, we're going to play a fun quiz. Look, it's fun because there's an animation quiz. So we're going to play this quiz called Beaver or Deceiver, because when we go out looking for beavers in KNAPDALE, we actually very rarely see them. Beavers tend to come out in the evening and stay out till the morning and then go back to bed. And so we very rarely see the beavers themselves unless we sit out for hours and hours and hours and do a stakeout. So mainly what we're looking for most of the time is beaver signs. So this might be somewhere where beavers, beavers themselves are really hard to see, but they're not subtle, fortunately for us. So if a beaver is in an area, you will know about it, because they build all kinds of structures, because they cut down trees, they leave a mark wherever they go. So for this super fun quiz, what I've done is pulled out 8 different pictures of various wildlife signs, and some of them have been made by beavers, but some of them have not, and they're the deceivers. Do you see what we've done there? It's fun because it rhymes. So what I want you to do for each picture that I put up, I think Mike is going to do something clever where you can join in with a quiz. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, it's fine.
Excellent. So all you have to do is click whether the picture that I'm showing you is beaver or deceiver. So question number 1, this picture here, we're starting easy. Do you think that is beaver sign or a different animal? Is it a deceiver?
I get to see all of the voting here. Do you want to see them as we go along, Helen, or at the end?
I think see them when we go through. We'll go through the answers after we've done them all. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
And we can see them. Does that make sense? 17
of you have voted. Come on, there's more of you than that.
It's anonymous. No one's going to know if you got it wrong.
No one knows. No one knows.
We'll know by your face when you're like, oh no, it was me.
There's no sweets to be won here.
Okay, are we ready for the next one?
Not quite. 19, 20 of 25 have voted. Last chance before I end the poll.
Did you lose on beaver or deceiver? It's a fast-paced game of wits.
There's definitely a strong vote in one direction on this one.
Okay, good news. Let's hope it's the right one. Okay, number 2. Is this something that's been done by a beaver or a different animal? Is it beaver or a deceiver?
Or much more split, this one.
Interesting.
So if it's a deceiver, could it be another animal or something more natural?
Yeah, it will always, they're all signs that are made by
animal.
some kind of animal. So yeah.
Okay, we've got all the votes in it.
Okay. Number 3, beaver or deceiver?
Hang on, I'm moving as fast as I can. Ooh. Very strongly in one direction on this one.
Okay.
Yes. Last one was equivocal, this one was not. This was unequivocal, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Number 4. It's a bit of a trickier one. Beaver or deceiver?
Fascinating. No, it's settling out in one direction here. Last chance. Okay.
Okay. Number 5.
That's remarkable. And it's always an animal that's done these.
Yep.
That's truly impressive. Okay.
Okay. Number 6.
Ooh. Well, there's complete and total agreement on that one. So either everyone's right or everyone's wrong.
Or I fooled them all. Okay. Number 7.
Again, very strongly on one side on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, and last one, number 8.
It's getting pretty down the middle on this one.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, are we ready for the answers? That's
Yeah.
an emotional roller coaster, isn't it? Okay, so starting with question 1. So question 1 was fairly easy, I thought. This is beaver. Mike, how did we do?
We got,
Yes.
You can see them, 76% went
Excellent.
beaver.
Excellent. So this is an aspen tree. This is one of the sort of more impressive fresh beaver signs I've seen. And so what you can see here, the key things we're looking out for is the wood is kind of either white or orange or yellow. It's very bright. You're going to see it very starkly against the rest of the forest. If you could see close in, you'd be able to see actual teeth marks where you've got these two teeth going down together over and over again, and then these chippings around the tree that the beavers have left. So what they're doing here, they'll be maybe eating some of the bark as it's coming off, but what they mainly want to do is cut down the large tree so that they can get to the smaller branches at the top and use them for what they want. They don't often tend to use these huge trees like this. They just want to get them over so that they can get the smaller branches that have got the tender leaves, the nice bark on, and that they can use to build their lodges and their dams. So that's what's happening there. So that's number one. Number two, this is a beaver lodge. Mike, how did we do?
It was a real split here.
Oh, wow. Okay, some people thought it was just a pile of sticks. Yeah, so beaver lodges do tend to look like a big old pile of sticks. So the lodge is the beaver's house. This is where it lives. And beavers can also just live in a burrow in the bank sometimes as well, but they will also build these lodges. And the lodges are all about camouflaging the entrance. So these sticks will go right under the surface of the water. Like we often canoe over to them and you can see them going all the way under the surface, all the way under where our boat is, because the entrance to the lodge is actually much further out. And what that means is when the beaver dives to go into the lodge, it dives quite far away from where the lodge actually is. And so in terms of hiding the lodge from predators, or rather hiding the entrance, because the lodge itself is quite obvious, but hiding the entrance, they're not giving much sign of where that is. So they'll build this big stick thing, they'll add to it every year, you'll see fresh twigs on there, you'll see really old stuff, and then they pack it in with mud to make it safe, and then inside they'll have a nesting chamber and a feeding chamber, and that's where they live. So it's a pretty cool structure. And number three, what did we have for this one, Mike?
Oh, you didn't catch them out, but this was very,
well done. Well done. So deer browse often gets mistaken for beaver sign because it also leaves stripped back orange wood, but it's way less uniform. You don't get those nice clean teeth marks, and deer just aren't as efficient. So beavers almost, they won't leave like hardly any bark on the branch, and deer will like take the front piece off near them and then wander off. Interestingly, what's happened to this branch, and I think we did find this one in KNAPDALE, is that it's also had some kind of insect or boar insect or something like that go through it and leave these funny tracks on it as well. So there's two different animals probably playing into this scenario here. So yeah, deer browse is often mistaken for beaver sign. This one, how do we go?
Well, I think you got them.
Oh, I fooled you all.
Got them with this one.
This one was really mean. So I like this one because it was something I'd never seen before, never expected to see. This is at our site in KNAPDALE. And this clearing, before the beavers got to it, was all green, all bracken to about my waist height. And they came through and just cleared it. A family of beavers were like, yeah, we're into bracken now. So they came up there and they took it all and they were using it for bedding in the lodge. They were eating some of it, which is really interesting because bracken is carcinogenic to most animals. So God knows if that's going to pay off in the long run. But yeah, they're making like feeding rafts out of it. And they just went completely through this bracken field. And then if you down to the left on this picture is the route down to their lodges and their feeding stations. So that was a really, really cool thing to see. And this happened very quickly. So a really good example of just how quickly beavers can alter a landscape in ways that you might not expect to see. So, Mike, humans are animals too. They can make signs in the forest. So yes, all the signs are made by animals. And this is someone with a chainsaw. So yeah, beavers would never be that neat. The end of a beaver-chewed branch tends to have this very characteristic sort of pencil shape, where it's like you've sharpened a pencil with a knife. So something as clean cut as this is never going to be a beaver, but the orange color is what you would expect to see. This is a beaver dam. Did everybody get beaver?
Completely.
Oh, look at that. Well done, beaver fans.
Well done, everyone.
So yeah, like I said, beaver dams, super characteristic of this animal. They're using it to control the water, and they're really, really cool structures that can be added to and maintained over time. And what is really interesting is that you'll sometimes see them build a dam and then they'll be like, nah, this hasn't quite done what we wanted it to do. Let's build another one down here. Oh no, that's not quite working. We'll come into a system that's got like maybe 3 dams at different stages where they're tutoring with different stuff. They're trying stuff out. They're figuring it out as they go along. You know, like people think, you know, how smart can a rodent be? These animals are incredible in terms of the sort of like engineering stuff that they're doing. So yeah, beaver dams are super cool. What about this one? Did anybody think this was beaver?
Didn't catch them out really, no.
Excellent news. So yeah, this is something we also see a lot in KNAPDALE Forest because there are a lot of deer. You get deer wallows, they mess up the land and they have this big puddle that they wallow around in. So it is water and it looks a bit like a pond, but it's created by deer, not beavers. And probably if you looked at the tracks in the mud, they would be very obviously deer tracks. And finally, this sign here, which I'll highlight for you. That's tricky to see. Oh,
yeah.
yeah, so this is really difficult, and this is really rare. I've only seen a beaver footprint in the field once while I've been doing this, and it was this one right here. We saw it first thing in the morning before anybody had trampled over it or the rain had washed it away. So it's not very often that we will see a beaver footprint, but it is really cool when we see them. So that's what that is. So that concludes this exciting edition of Beaver or Deceiver. But what that gives you an idea of, so when we go to KNAPDALE every 6 months, we do a complete circuit of every waterway, every loch, every stream in the forest, and we're looking for signs like this to find out where the beavers are, where they're living, so where's their actual construction, their dams, their lodges, where are they feeding, how is that activity changing? And what we can do is we take GPS points for all of those, and then we can map those. So this is these are two different maps of KNAPDALE, showing a survey that happened in 2019 in March, and then September 2019, so 6 months apart. And the little dots on the map, they're a little bit hard to see, but they're all different beaver signs. And so we've got these maps for every 6 months, for every period of the project, and we can watch how the beavers are moving around and how their site use is changing over time. And obviously after we do a new release, beavers will pop up in a different place on the map. Some beavers, so you can see a big long, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's a long loch system here, and it says Loch Coolivor in the middle of it. And there's a loch there called Barnluscan, there's a loch there called Coolivor, and there's another one, the Duloch, that they made. And that's one family just dominates that loch system. They're on it the whole time, and they're also moving down into this stream here, which is called the Fairy Isles. So that's just one set of beavers changing, but sometimes they'll be on Coolivor, sometimes they'll be up on Barnluscan, and they just decide where they want to be depending on what's happening at that time of year. So we can really track what's happening there. But we also need more information than that. And so the other thing we do is we spy on beavers using camera traps, because obviously the field signs are great, but it's really good for us to see the animals and try and understand who is where. So we know who we released where, and we try and put beavers in places where we think they're going to be happy. But often beavers are just like, no, I don't like that big lake you put me into. That was great, but I'm going to go and live in this puddle over here with this ditch next door because it's fun. I was a real fixer-upper, and I think I can do a lot with it. So they change where they are, and so we want to know where the beavers we've put out are. So we put these camera traps up, and to do so, you can see in these pictures, you've really got to sort of think like a beaver. So we're putting them out over water or at feeding stations where we know they're going to be. And in terms of identifying individuals, it's actually really difficult. We do put ear tags that look like this on all of our beavers before they're released, but beavers are really good at pulling them out. They've got these big, long, pointy fingers, and they're just like, no, don't like that. So they pull it out. So you see a beaver on a camera and it's got one ear tag. You're like, is that one that always had one ear tag, or has it pulled the other one out? You see one with no ear tags. You're like, was it born in KNAPDALE, or has it just pulled them both out? We don't know. And we can't put radio tags on them because they don't have a very good neck for radio collars. And very early in the project, people tried putting radio tags on their tails, and they just pulled them off. So, you know, they're really tricky animals in terms of monitoring and following them. So we do the best we can. They do have like characteristic tail scarring, like, you know, like you might see on like a dolphin fin or something like that. So we can identify some of them like that, and we can kind of figure it out based on what we know. But the camera traps are really good, A, for identifying beavers, but also for telling us what's going on. So we see a lot of behavior. So this is two beavers that we released early in the reinforcement project called Albert and Harris. So Harris is on his dam building away. So you can see these guys are real keen on home improvements. So they've brought in all this different straw and hay and stuff. And this is Albert coming in here. She's got her ear tags on, which you can see. And they like to have a little bit of cuddle and a bit of a bond to just like reinforce that couple bond for them. So we get to observe really nice behaviors like that. But we can also get really extra important information from these videos. So this is a video of a beaver called Iona, and she's on a different loch. And this is really interesting because she's trying to climb a tree, and beavers are not super graceful. They're not very good at this, but she's decided she's defo going to climb this tree. But the really interesting thing about this video is when she's going to stand up in a minute and she's going to reach up. And when she does, you'll see these little white dots on her underside. Those are nipples. Those are her nipples. Now, they're important because beavers only have nipples, female beavers, sorry, only have nipples when they've had kits. So if we see a beaver on a camera like this and she's got nipples, we're like, right, she's had kits this year. Let's see if we can go and find them. Let's see if we can go and sit down by that loch, see how many kits there are, what's happening, what's going on. So we can get some really, really important information from these cameras that would be really difficult for us to get otherwise. And it allows us to do that without disturbing the animals too much. And it allows us to do it when we're not physically there, because we can't be in KNAPDALE all the time. So that's really important. But sometimes we want even more information, and this was something that I decided to do in September last year, because I could see we were halfway through the project and there were still a lot of sort of unidentified individuals. We didn't know where everybody was, and so I was like, right, let's do some trapping, because they all have these microchips in their backs. If we trap beavers and we scan them, we get their microchip, we know exactly who they are. If they don't have a microchip, we know that it's an animal that's been born in KNAPDALE that we haven't seen before, and we can fit it with a microchip and take a genetic sample. So in terms of trapping beavers, it's not the easiest thing in the world. This is a big metal beaver trap. And basically what you do is you set it up, you camouflage it as best you can, and you fill it with a big beaver buffet. And the big beaver buffet sits on like a seesaw. And when the beaver steps on the seesaw to get the food, the trap snaps shut on either side. And the trap is big enough that the animal can stay in there overnight without getting too stressed out. And then we come and let it out in the morning. The other thing you can do, so you'd set that overnight and come back in the morning and check it. The other thing you can do is try and catch beavers at night on the water, which is where it gets really exciting. So this is where we work with experts like Rasheen and her colleague Rob. So you're going out on a boat, you're spotlighting for animals like you can see here, and then you sort of steer the boat to try and sort of encourage the animal to swim into the shallows, and then you jump out with a giant massive net, and you land in the water, and you catch the beaver in the net, and you scoop it up, and then you try and take it back to land. So obviously you want to know what you're doing when you're like jumping into the water in the dark, like trying to get a beaver in a net. Like that's a whole other thing. So Rob and Rasheen are really, really good at that and helped us out with that. When we've done that, obviously how we handle the animals is really important. And like I said, beavers are dangerous. And, you know, anytime you handle an animal, it's stressful for the animal. So you're trying to minimize the amount of time the animal's in the hand. You're trying to minimize stress for the animal, and you're also trying to minimize danger for yourself. So with the beavers, what we're doing here, you can see myself and Rasheen getting a beaver out of a trap in sort of 3 stages. Basically looks like I'm fishing for beavers, which is essentially what's happening there. We keep the beaver in the net, and then we put it as quickly as we can into a sack. And the reason we do that is so that it can't really see what's going on, and it's way less stressful. But what you'll notice we're doing here in this delightfully graceful position in the far side picture is I'm straddling the beaver while Rasheen gets in the back end and does all the stuff I was talking about before. And the reason I'm doing that, like you can't really see in this picture, but I'm kind of sort of half hovering above it. So I'm not actually sitting on it because I don't want to crush it with my weight, but I am kind of squeezing it with my thighs because it's really strong. So it's a great workout. This is fantastic for like those of you who are looking to shape up, get into beaver catching, but like you have to be very careful. So it's applying the right amount of pressure so that the animal can't escape, and certainly so that it can't turn around and try and bite you through the sack. That's really important, but also so that you're not actually hurting the animal. So that's kind of the balance that you're doing there. So it's a really kind of quite delicate and potentially dangerous process. So you have to have people around who know what they're up to there. And then we get to release the beaver, which is my favorite part, because you get to actually watch, you know, this is a really cool opportunity to watch beavers swimming free in the wild, often in broad daylight. So this is Harris again, actually, who we caught. So you'll see him released. He swims out towards me. I think he's clocked that I'm the person that's making all this happen. So he's given me some evils, and he's going to have a little look, and then he's going to give me the big middle finger, beaver style, basically. So that's Harris telling me to bugger off. So he's slapping his tail on the water before he swims off. It's a warning to all the other beavers in the area that something dodges up. And it's also him being like, get off my land. But what's interesting about this is that although that, you know, you're like, well, that's obviously quite stressful. But, you know, we caught Harris 3 times on that trip because the lure of the beaver buffet is much greater than the stress. We caught Iona 5 times, I think, in the end. And by the end of it, we were desperately trying to catch her partner, and he just wouldn't get in the trap. And by the end, you know, I was turning up at the trap at like 6:30 in the morning with a coffee, being like, morning, love, right, let's get you out of there. They're always so angry. And you're just like, well, what did you think was going to happen when you went after the beaver buffet? But so that's, you know, they come out of it pretty unscathed. And if it's a beaver that we've already trapped before, we just release them straight away and off they go. No harm, no foul. And they've had a lovely meal. So is this project working? We had 3 goals in this project when we started. The first is that we would have 2 pairs of beavers from TAYSIDE establish and breed as part of this reinforcement project. The second goal was that we would have 1 pair that was made up of 1 Norwegian and 1 Bavarian beaver, and that they would successfully be breeding. And that overall in KNAPDALE, we would have at least 5 breeding pairs or family groups, regardless of what sort of genetic makeup they were. So When I was there in September, we did do a lot of catching, and we caught a lot of kits. And this is actually a really exciting video because it's the first video we got of a kit that is the result of a Bavarian pairing. So this is 2 Bavarian beavers that were released into KNAPDALE that have successfully had kits. And one of those was Iona, which is the female that you saw on the camera with the nipples. So this is why she's got the nipples. And if I play this again, you'll see that the kits are quite interesting because, oh, good Lord. They hover quite high in the water. So when you see them, they're really, really buoyant. So they're a bit like a bath toy. So you see like most of their body is out of the water, which is why they look kind of like chubby and wobbly. Whereas the adults, like you just see like a V of their spine and their head, but the kits are all just like, oh, I'm not very good at this. So that's what's happening there. So in terms of these goals, where have we got to? Well, we definitely do have 2 Bavarian pairs that have established in KNAPDALE and bred and had kits. So that's fantastic news. We also think we have at least 5 pairs. I'm going to confirm that in September, but we're almost 100%. We've definitely got 4. We think we've got a 5th. And when I go back at the end of the month, we'll try and confirm that. The only thing we're probably going to fall short on is this Norwegian Bavarian cross, and that's just a matter of time. And the good news is that because we've got Bavarian kits, because we've got Norwegian kits now in that population, as they disperse out, the likelihood of this cross happening becomes much higher. So that's fantastic. So, you know, this project's actually been really, really successful. And when we get the genetic results back, we'll be able to judge exactly how successful it's been in terms of increasing genetic diversity in that population as well. So in terms of where to next, this project finishes at the end of this year. September will be the last time we go out to monitor the KNAPDALE beavers. We will stay involved in beaver conservation planning in Scotland. We sit on something called the Scottish Beaver Forum, which is a multi-stakeholder forum that involves farmers and fisheries and Nature Scot and beaver advocacy groups and lots of different people all coming together to figure out the best management strategy for beavers in Scotland. At the moment, the Scottish government policy is that there will be no future beaver translocations outside the range. So you can move them around in Tayside, you can move them from Tayside to KNAPDALE, but you can't start new populations. And that's something that we're hoping to change because there are lots and lots of different sites in Scotland that are actually really suitable for beavers, where we could move some of those beavers that are causing issues in Tayside and use them to start a new population. Our genetic data will inform whether or not we have enough genetic diversity in Scotland in total. Is there an argument to say that you might want to bring in more beavers from overseas? Like, is the population genetically healthy? And that's a really important question for England as well, because at the moment, most English beavers that are going into projects that are being started under license in England are coming from Scotland. Some of those problem beavers that we don't have room for in KNAPDALE anymore because we're getting full up, they need to go somewhere. And so a lot of them are getting translocated into England. So they're all coming from that same genetic stock. And that raises some really important questions as well. So the future of beavers in England and the UK as a whole is potentially very exciting, but there are still lots and lots of question marks, and it's really important that we get clear management strategies in place for all the various countries that are going to end up with beavers in the UK, so that we have really good ways of managing these animals, who are wonderful, wonderful animals to work with. So yeah, that is it from me on beavers, a whistle-stop tour of how the Scottish Beavers project has worked. If you're too frightened to ask a question now, I know some people get a bit nervous, so you can find me on Twitter. Feel free to send me a message and come and approach me with any questions you have. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to have a chat about stuff now, but thank you so much all for coming and joining me.
Well, Helen, that was absolutely awesome, I have to say, and we have had plenty of questions, so I'll let you. I'm
going to go back to the grid because I like being able to
have a quick swig of your beer, and then we'll start taking through them. So please do stay on through the questions, but if you do need to leave, we understand as well. So starting off, you did kind of mention at the end there that there's no plans at the moment to introduce more. We've got a question around where does the law in Scotland stand on further reintroductions?
So currently the policy is that we can't do them.
Thing, or is it, what's the red tape around it?
So basically the current situation is that you can move them around in Tayside, you can move them within the limits of their range. There's a little bit of back and forth at the moment about whether, so for example, beavers have spread as far west as Loch Lomond. There's one beaver hanging out in Loch Lomond, right, by itself, looking for some mates. So can you, because that's now part of the range, could you put another beaver into Loch Lomond? that's a question that we're currently trying to understand the answer to, because that's really important in terms of how beavers can be helped to expand. The government are very keen on natural expansion, but they are allowing translocations within the existing range. So Loch Lomond is now the existing range. So, you know, how that works is really interesting. You know, eventually we would really like to see the Tayside population spread fully west and meet up with the KNAPDALE population and have natural mixing rather than us sort of bringing them across, and you'd have this continuous band across the country, which would be really cool to see. But we will need a legislative change if we're to put beavers in more places in Scotland, for sure.
So that last point there, I mean, is that actually quite a lot to do with the natural geography of Scotland, that those lochs all do kind of connect?
Yeah, there's lots of water. I mean,
for that part of the UK.
Yeah, for like, so I mean, if you were a beaver in KNAPDALE and you somehow managed to make it out of the canal, across the canal, you could get into a river called the Ad, which would then take you up to a loch called Loch Orr. And from there, you can sort of get out into another river system that's going to take you across. And eventually you do sort of see the Tayside catchment joining up with that one. So it's not impossible. I mean, you think like beavers have been in Tayside for just over 14 years now that we know of, and they've managed to get across as far as Loch Lomond, right? So it's not super rapid. Like, beavers are rodents, but they don't breed as fast as things like mice and rats and stuff. So they are a bit slower to reproduce. They're a bit slower to spread. And as the kits will stay with the families for like a couple of years. And then when they reach sexual maturity, they disperse off to find a new territory. And that's how that spread sort of happens. So it does take time, but given the right habitat and the right waterways, they can spread quite far by themselves.
Coming back to that Tayside release, what was the number and relatedness within that?
So we're the genetic data we're doing at the moment will help us get into that a little bit more. We previously, based on some preliminary genetic analysis we did, it suggests that there were about, it looks like sort of around 12 individuals, but from 3 families, roughly, we think. But the new data that we're getting now is going to be much more high resolution and should give us some better answers and help us determine maybe even where in Bavaria those beavers might have come from originally as well, which would be really cool.
So another quick question here from Chris: do they carry diseases?
So they can carry diseases. So beavers get blamed a lot for giardia, which sometimes gets called beaver fever, but that's actually a complete misnomer, and they don't transmit giardia at all. So giardia, I've had giardia, it's horrible, I don't recommend it. It comes from like fecal matter in the water and stuff like that. I got it when I was overseas. And we've tested beavers for giardia, they don't have it, and they're not carrying it. We test them for things that we're more worried about in terms of things they might transmit to cattle, and also things that they might transmit to other beavers. We do a lot of testing for things like echinococcus, and various bacteria that could cause issues for other beavers. So that's the whole thing with our vet team are doing. So they carry diseases in as much as any animal is capable of carrying a disease. And like I said, we are extremely careful. No beaver gets released into KNAPDALE by us without there being a full disease screening, and they don't get released until we've seen all the results and checked that they're okay. It's really important.
Okay, so there's a question from Victoria around the differences in European and American beavers. Mm-hmm. Is it having different numbers of chromosomes that make them different species?
Yeah. So I think, now let me get this right, because I only read about this the other day. So I think it's that North American beavers, and I'm going to get this the wrong way around now. North American beavers have 24 pairs of chromosomes and European beavers have 20 pairs. Whereas, yeah, so
stunning.
It's actually quite a different number of chromosomes. And so, yeah, that just means if they breed together, it just won't work. You'd have an inviable embryo, and because the numbers of chromosomes wouldn't be able to pair up and match together. So it's quite interesting. The reason we realize that is because we're doing some genetic mapping, and the only beaver genome that's currently assembled is the North American beaver genome. So we're using that for our genetic mapping, but we know that it won't be 100% accurate because the genome of the Eurasian beaver would be quite different.
Wow. So you talked about the fact you're getting near your limits of KNAPDALE, I think you said.
Pretty much at the limit, I would say, at this point.
So Jay was asking, is there a maximum number that reserve can support? And is that
So when I say we're at the limit, that's based on my assessment that all of the territory that is suitable to release beavers into is currently occupied. So at the moment, if you said, I want you to release 2 more beavers into KNAPDALE, I'd look at the map and be like, cool, where do you want me to put them? Because there isn't anywhere suitable to release them into. Now, obviously that can change over time. Beavers can disperse, beavers can die. you know, different stuff can happen. But and the current situation, every large body of water that's suitable for a beaver has beavers on it, living on it. So it's not always about numbers. It's sometimes, you know, some of those bodies of water just have 2 beavers on, some of them have a family. You know, that 3-lock system I was talking about has several generations of a family. So it's different numbers. And like I said, we think there's like 20 to 30 beavers, like for all the reasons I've mentioned in terms of individual identification. We can't get more specific than that on numbers, but we can know what territories are in use, and that's our really definitive thing. And so that's how I know that KNAPDALE is full at the moment.
Great. Now I'll leave you to decide who asked this question. But if beavers don't have external genitalia, how do they have sex?
Who's asking filth in my science talk?
Exactly what I described it as, yes.
Filth from Dr. Rosen.
No, it's a genuine question, because I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other mammals that don't have external genitalia.
Yeah, I don't know. I was quite surprised when I found out about it. I don't know if like, what about like otters? And I was wondering if it was something to do with the aquatic side of things, but I don't know. Obviously, I'm a bird person, so I'm used to like animals that just bang their holes together. But like,
I was defaulting to cloaca.
They make that face. You're a bird person, you know. It's about the holes. But yeah, so
I'll have to warn you.
What I would guess, and I am guessing now, so let's just like all ignore this, is that the penis would be everted during sex. Like there must be a mechanism that would like poke it out, but I don't know that for sure. I'm going to look that up, Claire, and I'll post it on the Facebook wall for everybody who's interested. And everybody who wasn't at that talk will be like, oh my God, what's happened to SciBar?
A much better question.
That's a great question. Just because I don't know the answer doesn't make it a good question, bad question.
Thankfully, Claire's mum's asked a much better question, which I think is I really want to know the answer to. Given you talked about how much iron's in their teeth, the strength of it. So, do they have to eat a particularly iron-rich diet, and how do they receive an iron-rich diet? She did ask that question before the broccoli appeared, I have to say.
Yeah, but that's us giving them the broccoli, so they're not getting that from us. I mean, a lot of plants will contain minerals and stuff that they're getting from the soil, things like silica and stuff like that. But I honestly don't know, because obviously for us, we eat meat, and that's where our iron comes from, right? And it's actually like, as a vegan, I can confirm that there's like, it can be quite difficult to get things like that from a plant-based diet, but it's not impossible. So obviously plants like spinach and things like that, cruciferous vegetables, going to have a lot of iron in it. So again, I'm going to make a huge assumption that some of the plants they're eating at least will contain iron, and that's where that's coming from, because they must be getting it from somewhere, because the teeth are constantly growing and constantly regenerating. So that as they're chewing down the wood, the teeth are getting worn down, they keep growing. So they have to be adding iron into those teeth. So they must be getting it in their diet. Yeah, for sure.
I wonder if they're like humans, you can't actually store iron anyway. So you have to put it
straight into the teeth. It's their iron storage place.
Whether they need it anywhere else. Yeah, that's a good one. So so how genetically distinct are Bavarian and Norwegian beavers? Is there a risk of breeding avoidance?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so they're quite different. So my boss, Helen Sen, did a really nice genetic analysis on beavers across Europe, looking at how different they were. And this is how we know that Norwegian beavers don't have a lot of genetic diversity. So to really simplify things, if we say that like Norwegian beavers have like one genetic variant, basically, when you look at them at a certain gene, Bavarian might have 3 or 4 at that same variant. So they've got quite a lot more diversity. Now, what's interesting, just from some of the preliminary data that I'm seeing from the TAYSIDE beavers that we're testing, is that they've got different genetic diversity to the Bavarian beavers that we've tested previously, which would suggest to me that they've come from a different part of Germany than the Bavarian beavers that were originally in our sample set, because we sampled from one place in Germany. So there's probably actually even more genetic diversity in Germany than we'd originally counted for, because again, it's the same. When you do a genetic sample, the more skittles that you pull out, the more you're going to find up to a certain level when you've captured all the genetic diversity. You sample from one place in a country, you get red, green, and yellow. You sample from another place, you get brown, pink, blue. So in terms of them avoiding each other, that's highly unlikely, because they are all still quite closely related. So yes, we do see these different genetic variants, but we also see some of the same ones popping up between them. So whereas like the Norwegians maybe have one and the Bavarians have four, one of them will be the same as the Norwegian one, right? So there's definitely similarities there. They're not like completely different and completely separate. It's just that the Bavarians have got more, and some that we don't see pop up in the Norwegians, if that makes sense. So, but we don't think that would be enough to make them avoid each other.
So Chris asked a question that I was going to ask actually, because you know, are the predators of the beavers? You know, he's wondering whether mink might be taking out those cute little kits, but
yeah. So there's not like the main things that would normally take out beavers would be things like wolves and lynx, which obviously we don't really have. Well, we don't have them in the UK. But we do have some evidence that potentially otters are taking out beaver kits. So definitely not the adult. The adults are far too big and feisty, but the kits, yes, they are vulnerable. You've seen how they bob around in the water, and they are, you know, they're out in the water relatively young. And so things like otters could have a go. We've not had any. It would be really interesting. One thing we talked about doing at one point was collecting otter poo, otter spraint, and doing genetic testing to see if you could find any beaver DNA in there to suggest that they had been eating beaver kits. We've never caught it on camera. There is some footage came out the other day of like a beaver and an otter having a fight, but that was a couple of adults. But that is a potential, but it's the only real potential. There's not much else that we think would be taking out beaver kits at this point that we're aware of. So
not
obviously,
birds of prey, or
I think it'd be quite difficult because they're just in the water so often. So unless it was something like an osprey and they're just into fish, really.
yeah.
So yeah, I think it would be quite tricky for them to do that. It's not impossible, and you know, I would never rule it out. I never underestimate what animals are capable of doing, but we certainly don't have any evidence to support that.
And Billy asks whether if you can't put beavers outside of their range, could you just keep adding more to the territory they have and expect them to expand out?
You could do that, but you can't really do it in Tayside because no one's going to let you do that because there's
Not legally.
that would not be a popular move to add more and more beavers into Tayside. trying to move them on.
Brilliant. Well, we've come to the end of the questions that people have been putting into the chat box. As usual at this point, again, we give you a chance to sign off and leave. Anyone who wants to stay and ask more questions, we'll just drop out the mics and go for it now. But I think this is the point when we just probably want to all turn our microphones on and just give Helen a huge, huge round of applause because that was fantastic, wasn't it?
Thank you.
Come on with me now. Do join us. Remember, it's always the second Tuesday of every month. Sean, have we got something lined up for next time, or are we keeping it a little bit of a secret?
We're keeping it a little bit of a secret in a second. I think I've got it nailed down. We will keep you guys in suspense for now.
Yeah, I don't think we're quite getting to the point where we'll be back in person just yet.
No.
But we've had a lot of fun doing it this way, and that's the only way we can get people as cracking as Helen. So thank you all, and good night. But you don't need to rush off straight away.
Thanks. I'm glad you're doing it this way because it means I get to do it.
Yeah, and we're really glad you got to do it. And you're getting lots of praise in the chat box.
I love a good emoji clap.
But this is the point when you stop recording.